Episode 5 of the Consistency Podcast is here. My name is Stephen Gloucester, and this week I want to focus on the word expected and expectations. And to begin, I never would have expected to have received an invitation to go back on the Kirk Minihane show so soon, but that's what's happening this Friday. I will be joined by Andy Mayo in studio, and to be honest, I don't know what the expectations for this show is going to be. I don't know if I'm going to be the referee with Mayo and Kirk. I don't know if I'm going to be a third wheel and listen to Andy do his thing. Or I don't know if it's going to be like last Friday where I had the opportunity to ask some questions, provide some feedback, bring up some topics, and really have a good flow with Mutt and Kirk as the show went on. To me, the wild card about this is Mayo. I mean, I don't know the guy. Never met him. Messaged him maybe once or twice on Twitter, but that's about it. I really haven't had much interaction with him. I do know the feedback and the commentary that he has gotten from people on Twitter. I know Kirk really doesn't like him. I know that Kirk has banned him from the studio at one point. He blocked him on Twitter. So, I don't know what to expect from him. What I am going to try to do in my expectations for the show is to try to improve on last week's performance. Kirk gave me a grade of a B, and I think that that's a solid grade. I think I did enough to get that B. But what I want to try to do is keep that B or improve upon it. And the only way that I can do that is to try to control what I can control. The first thing will be this quote-unquote Sicilian act that unfortunately keeps on coming up. And I think anybody who listened to the telethon today, saw the Richie Aprile type act that comes out when I do get nervous, when people do get under my skin, when the blood pressure does go up. I mean, the act comes out. And I know people like it, but I know Kirk doesn't like it. So I'm going to do my best to try to curb that on Friday. The other thing I'm really going to try to do is get in there early, make sure that microphone's in a perfect position that when I speak into it, Kirk can hear me right off the bat. I know that drove him nuts the first 5 minutes of the show. I know he didn't like it. He got on my case about it. I got to be able to correct that. I got to be able to fix that mic. And the only way for me to do that is to get in the studio early, do the mic checks with Coleman, make sure I'm talking perfectly into the microphone so that's not an issue to start off the show. And the other thing I really want to do is bring a game into the studio this week. And there's one thing I definitely want to take a mulligan on from last week is the fact that I didn't bring a game in, and I kind of looked down at the games. I called it the JV thing. Absolutely should have took that back. I know Kirk enjoys the games, so I'm definitely going to work on one, bring it in, and hope that he'll want to participate in it. And the game might be needed, because who knows what's going to happen during the show, especially with Mayo there. So those are two things I definitely want to try to do. And, I definitely want to try to improve on how things went last Friday. And I've definitely taken the feedback by Kirk, and I'm going to try to use it. And if Friday's my last day on the show, then it's my last day in the show, and there's really nothing I can do to control that. But I am looking at this from a perspective that Kirk had first said I'm never going to appear in the show, and I did. Then Kirk said my appearances will be over and under 1.5, and Friday will be episode number 2. Unbelievably awesome. Going to be there. Mike Montante had asked Kirk on Mike and the Minifans if he thought my over and under would be 3.5 appearances. And Kirk said, no, it's probably going to go under. I don't think he's part of the Miniverse. I don't think he's long for the world. And he could be right. But the only person that will be able to control that narrative is me. I mean, obviously Kirk has the final say, and he could say you're never welcomed in here again. And he can definitely do that. But I think if I do enough on that show and I really try to curb that quote-unquote Sicilian act, maybe the opportunity will present itself going forward. And like I said before, if the door closes and this won't happen, then the best thing I can do is try to use what I've learned from Kirk, the advice that he's given me, and use that to better this show going forward or any of the projects I may have going forward. And I don't know what the future of this podcast is going to hold. I mean, I enjoy doing the Consistency Podcast. It's a lot of fun. But I also don't want to continue something if I know that it's going to upset the skip. I mean, I definitely don't want to do that. So we'll see where it goes. But I also know that the skip's going to probably be upset at me anyway, because there was some commentary on today's telethon, in which I said that maybe the way the letter was presented on the show was a little bit of bullshit. It was to improve on a storyline. And I called him Kirky bullshit. And let me explain, because I was put on the ropes a little bit, and, unfortunately I didn't have representation there. I felt like during the show I needed Vincent LaGuardia Gambini to help me out here, but what I wanted to say was this. When that letter was sent, I had first had the top 50 list sent, and that was talked about on the show. Then the second letter was sent out right around, I'd say, the middle to late October. And what I had noticed was I sent the letter out, and for about a week or two, nothing was really mentioned about this letter. So I thought, all right, maybe he didn't get it. Or maybe he got it, he read it, and he put it next to him on the desk or whatever. And then I found it fascinating that I had recorded episode 1 of the Consistency podcast. Kirk immediately hears the podcast, immediately talks about it on his show. They went through the whole show and they had talked about me and went through all the drops and everything. Then they called me on the show and I talked to him and we kind of talked back and forth with him and Blind Mike for 10 minutes. And I thought, okay, everything's fine. I understood what happened. I got my explanation. I felt okay. I thought we were done and over with. So then all of a sudden, he had Jared Carrabis on the show. And then he said after his show was over with Jared, that he saw the letter. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he's right. But to me, it seemed kind of strange because the letter was mailed in the Boston area. And correct me if I'm wrong, Watertown to Boston ain't Boston to Los Angeles. They're right next door to each other. So I kind of find it hard to believe that a letter that was sent out 2 weeks prior all of a sudden showed up at his doorstep after his show with Carrabis. And he's probably right. He's 100% right. But part of me is like, wait a minute. Was this part of a storyline here that he wanted to develop with me? And if it is, absolutely awesome, Kirk. Honestly, it's a great move by you. But I'm willing to bet that it was probably just the Postal Service doing the Postal Service thing. Poor Mick had that problem with the shirts he wanted to send to Jeff D. Lowe. I don't know if they got there yet. The Postal Service can be idiotic in the way that they do their business. But it just seemed to me like the narrative of that letter, which again, should never have been sent in the first place. I had just lost my dad. I was not in the right frame of mind when I sent that. Regardless, I just found it kind of strange that the podcast came out, he was on with Jared, the letter showed up, and I'm willing to bet if you looked at the postmark of that letter, it was sent out before episode 1 of the Consistency podcast. But be it as it may, I know it's going to be a big deal on Friday. I know he's going to give me hell about it. I know he's going to come at me hard. And all I can do is sit and take the beating. I mean, there's really not much I can say. This is the way I feel. Like I said, I'm going into this saying, hey, I'm probably wrong. He probably did get it that day with Jared. But to me, it just seems a little off. If he can clarify it for me, great. Move on. Water under the bridge. Let's have a good show. But obviously, I get the feeling that he's going to come at me with both barrels, and I don't know if I'm going to last the whole time in the studio on Friday. And if that happens, hey, lesson learned. So we'll see where it goes. I am, like I said, very excited to be in the studio on Friday. I did have some other topics this week. I really did want to get into more of the Gussie bullshit angle, but I think we can save that for Friday's show. And, I'll be back next week with a recap of my appearance on the Kirk Minahan show and, hopefully bring up some other topics for discussion. So anyway, thanks for listening, and I look forward to